everyone. We have four very sharp people on the publisher side. We have Scott and Chao representing classic publishers. Kenrika is representing Mediavine, an aggregator of long-tail quality publishers. And Mike from Prebid, header bidding open source solution that works with basically every publisher on the internet. To kick us off, I think there was a lot of optimism this morning, which we're all really happy about. But at Jounce, we study supply chain dynamics for the open internet, and the reality is that at least 20% of dollars still flow through resold auctions, like zero value, rebroadcasting, 40% of all bid requests. The average publisher monetizes through 25 authorized SSPs. That number goes up every single year. And it's not creating more supply, it's just more auctions. And so with each auction that doesn't bring a dollar, there's still a carbon cost. And so this panel understands those dynamics better than anyone. And so I think to get us started, I think for this industry to get right, we've talked about this throughout the day, but we need to get organized on standards and measurement. What is a good publisher? What does the average publisher look like in terms of carbon emissions? So can you each speak to what your companies are doing to measure, what tools you're using, are you happy with them? Feel free to take it away.
I could.
Sure. So Recurrent was actually founded from a sustainability mindset. Its original founders were very carbon focused and sustainability focused. So, we try to continue that mindset as we move forward across the entirety of the organization, not necessarily just with supply chain. Fortunately, I had a really strong background in supply chain and utilization of STXT. So once I arrived here a couple of years ago, we immediately took a look at the way in which we were broadcasting auctions and pared them down significantly, probably removed half of the partners, 75% of the STXT lines, and maintain that strategy as the go forward. So, and it's kind of near and dear to my heart with supply chain tightness, and from an education perspective, internally, it took a little bit of time to help a lot of people who were not close to ad inventory or just the ad business in general to understand what the implications are financially, environmentally of what we're doing.
Yeah, so I think I'll echo Scott's point, which is overall sustainability is actually a much bigger topic than just us supplying media into the ecosystem, right? So I know Brian mentioned a little bit earlier that we're the first U.S. publisher certified with or assessed with a Scope 3. But really, the background story is that we're a Axel Springer company, and Axel Springer has a long history of focusing on sustainability. Right, back in 1994, they actually did the first audit of their plant, the paper plant, and they started to produce sustainability reports since 2005. So certainly they had a lot of time going through that and a lot of trial and errors and just observing the industry. And that's really why they're kind of setting that standard when it comes to reporting the sustainability for a publisher, right? And as an Axel Springer company, the group commits to a climate neutrality by 2024. And we're going to reduce our carbon emission by 90% by 2045. Right? There's a lot of sort of general corporate principles there that really lead to our decision to really go forward and lead in this conversation right now. And I think on the measurement side, I kind of take sort of a parallel approach of measurement and reduction. Right? We don't need measurement to reduce. We know where the wastes potentially are. When you actually manage I think we're taking the approach of we need to reduce the waste, at the same time start to have the right measurement conversation. I think we're still on that journey together with Scope 3 and Prebid and all the different industry partners to figure out what's the most effective way to measure this. And of course, like what's the level of granularity on measurement. So I think that's something we're going to continue to develop. But from a top line standpoint, we want to reduce and we want to measure at the same time.
Yeah, I would say on the Mediavine side, so you made a good point there, Ben. And as others have alluded to earlier, measurement is tricky. I mean, let's just be real. It's tricky. There isn't a standardized kind of measurement framework for publishers to work towards or work through right now. So I'll say that at Mediavine right now, our priority is kind of looking internally and looking at the resources that we have and making sure that our house is in order. We are very big on being a part of the conversation. Hillary, we're partnering with the IAB. Yes, I see you. So leveraging partnerships with the IAB and making sure that we're part of positioning ourselves in the conversation that is going to move the industry forward in this space is really important. We're looking at things like our day-to-day energy consumption and servers and things and other things that we've been doing with our ad products, which I might touch on a little bit later. So I'll say at Mediavine, it's top of mind, and we haven't committed to any tools right now. We know that we are aware of the tools that are out there. We're continuing to educate ourselves. We haven't made any commitment to those tools just yet, but again, looking internally and focusing on our scope 1s and 2s and doing what we can, make steps in order to go in the right direction in this space.
Yeah, and from a Prebid perspective, Brian alluded to it today. Like, we exist to serve as a hedge against Google. That's how Prebid and header bidding was born. It has evolved where we are basically set up for a publisher, right, for the entire publisher community to have frictionless transactions across the entire ecosystem, regardless of what inventory type, data, it doesn't matter. We do it all. We allow them to decide how they want to transact. Our job is just to connect the pipes and make sure that they're seeing that from a transparent perspective with all their partners. Prebid's always taken a stance of not recommending, even though we can see it and we know if someone's doing something wrong, or when I mean wrong, like you have an incorrect setup based on your size, that type of thing, that we've always taken a blind eye to commenting on that just because there's too many publishers using this, right? There's something like 60,000 instances of Prebid out there. We would need 1,000 people monitoring that. What we are going to start doing is we are going to start putting out what we are thinking are going to be guidelines that are going to allow publishers of different sizes to understand basic things like how many header bidders you should be working with, right? What to do with pixels, right? Which, like someone alluded to that with Sincera, we work with them too. We see it all the time. People have like 100 pixels firing, and the reality is probably 10 of them are actually generating revenue, right? So how many pixels you should have firing, right? How many resellers you should be working with, quite frankly, right? And then more importantly, how do you test incrementality between all of these partners so you understand who's truly driving revenue and who's doing, like, the last click attribution gaming system, right? To, basically you're going to win the bid, but what's happening there is you're not making as much money and it's inefficient because of the, it's stopping you from working with a partner that can drive more direct revenue for you, right? So from our side, probably by Q4, we'll have this set up. We have two task force set up right now. They're made up of publishers. Both of them are on it. That we're working purely from a sustainability standpoint on one. On the other one, it's SPO and DPO, where we think eventually both will merge and kind of be the same solution. The trick for us is, quite frankly, that there is no measurement, right? There is no standard. So for us, we're a product-based organization that we go from code to product in 6 months. That's not going to happen, right? We're probably going to have the next 90 days guidelines issued from both task force on what Prebid is going to be doing. The missing component of there that we're going to need help with is anything to do with measurement, that the measurement companies come in and work with us. And then once that happens, we can start making the determination on what we want to do from a product perspective and align it with the publishers, to the SSPs, to the DSPs, and then ultimately to the buyers. And we will be working with the IAB on this as well, just because the same members work in the same committees.
Kenrika, you mentioned the priorities within the green initiatives, but I guess, and Scott, I'd like to get your thoughts here too, but where does this sit in terms of the bigger picture of monetizing websites and yield? How do you prioritize green initiatives more generally relative to data and monetization?
So at Mediavine, efficiency has always been top of mind for us. We are very efficient in a few of the things that we do. So I'll say leveraging partnerships like the IAB, being a part of the Prebid Sustainability Task Force, doing things like that and making sure we're a part of the conversation, and balancing that with kind of what we're doing internally. Something I wanted to mention was that about 2 months ago, we actually deprecated autoplay. And the impact from that was actually really huge. We went from, I think it was about 1.5 terabytes, or petabytes, sorry, to about 370 terabytes, right? And then we were recommending our universal player to a lot of our pubs, and the impact of that was we saw about a 92-ish% in reduction in the data collection. And so when I talk about looking internally and seeing where we are and making those small steps, I mean, that's a great example right there. We were able to do that with just one ad product. So that's really huge. Another thing that we're doing is we're reviewing our servers and how we're computing. We're in the process of eliminating, switching servers and things like that, because again, energy consumption is important. And so we are doing these incremental steps as far as sustainability, partnering with the right people and being a part of the conversation, and trying to uphold to the Mediavine standard, which is being as efficient as possible.
So we definitely focus on efficiency and effectiveness as it relates to the supply chain, like I mentioned before. But also, we're publishers. It's hard to be a publisher. It's very difficult to generate revenue. So we have a keen eye on overall yield and our revenue management practice. So as a result, we maintain our supply chain, but also I think more interestingly and importantly, we're in the process of overhauling our entire ads infrastructure such that it is faster and more effective, so that it can send the outbound requests, receive the bids, and not lose bids due to slowness of action. So we're in the process of migrating our sites right now. We've done a good handful. We've seen significant results in a cleaner pipeline with more efficient and faster transactions. So that's definitely helped out. And I think, as the panel mentioned before, it's difficult to measure the emissions results, but by proxy, making things speedier and faster, we're fully aware that there is carbon effectiveness that we're promoting as we go through these iterations and exercises.
Awesome. Chao, we've heard a lot about Insider and the work that you guys have done in terms of sustainability. Also, Mike, I'd love to get the more zoomed out perspective from Prebid, but what are the things that we need to see from the industry to really move the needle further for businesses that are already making these changes? And, Mike, for broader, more publishers across the web, what do we need to see happen to really start to move the needle beyond measurement?
You need some form of standardization, right? So at the end of the day, everyone in this room's probably got their idea of what sustainability means and what type of partner they're working with, and every single partner has a different even way of looking at sustainability, right? If it's scope 1, 2, 3, and how they all connect the dots. Right now, there is no consensus on any of that. So forget about Prebid, for any product-based company, ad tech, DSP, anyone, it's next to impossible to roadmap something if you don't know what you're building towards, right? So what is the standard I'm building towards? Because if I build towards this, I'm going to get mass adoption. If I get mass adoption, right, then we can start enforcing things in the industry that were talked about today about, if you're not a sustainable publisher, you can be dropped off of buys, stuff like that. You can't do any of that at all without having some form of standards that the publishers understand what the goalposts are and where they have to move to, and in that way product can start being developed that way. right? Some of the stuff that's out there now, like with Brian and Scope 3, that's like the beginning, right? I don't think it's the end, right? I think that's just the beginning, and I think it's going to be multiple partners like that are going to come together, right? From a pre-bid perspective, it's purely, we want them to come to the table and build into us, right? We don't, because we're agnostic to solution. We want all of them built in, and then we allow the publisher to choose what's proper for them. But what we want is to be able to say what's the standard, so that way we know the ones that we're letting in are the correct ones, right? That we're not just letting in other bad actors into the space, or people that are going to come in and have a radically different definition of what sustainability is to, say, two other partners that we're allowing in to, to build a mod in or whatever they're going to end up doing. So for us, that's kind of core, that we need the industry, and that's what we're hoping to do with the IAB, right? That's what we're hoping to do with our members. We're not 100%, we're not a governance body. We will not be policing this stuff. We don't police anything like this. What we want to understand clearly is what we're going to be shooting for. Once we get there, we can build a product in 6 months that the industry can use. But right now, it's kind of where we sit on all these committees, and it's pretty much guessing at what it is we should be doing outside of working with a bunch of random, vendors, right, for point solutions. A point solution is not an industry solution, right? A point solution is good for you and for whoever believes the math behind that solution, right? An industry solution is something that everyone will look at and say, that is okay, everyone can use this, is okay, and I believe the math and I believe the numbers, right? Until that happens, there's kind of like this quicksand happening where everyone's talking about this, but there's very little real action happening around it, right? So,
I think convening such a group of people today is a great start, right? What's the last time we had buy-side, agency, sell-side, everyone just together talking about this, right? So I think, that's the first start. And I think earlier today, we talked a lot about some of the passion, some of the measurement. I think there's a piece to this, which is really how do we intentionally manage our operations, right? I think everyone needs to think about, by the end of the day, emissions, carbon, all these things is generated by, sort of let the Jesus take the wheel type of operation, right? If you're really careful about how you're operating your business, then everyone will eventually achieve that. So I think that's the first thing, which is how do we intentionally manage this as part of the whole industry. The second part is, I think it's really around how we learn with each other, how do we collaborate on these standards or on the general understanding, whose job is it to do blank, right? When we look at the space, we always have those conversations when it comes to rates and floors and all the technical details. But once it comes to an industry effort like this, I think we all need to sit down at the table to say, hey, who's doing which part and how do we affect the entire ecosystem. And I think from a go-to-market standpoint, one of the things that's startling, we just launched our One Planet initiative as well as an editorial pillar. And the genesis of that is when we look at our audience, when we did a proprietary research, 80% of our readers care about, what they can do about the planet. So a lot of this is also an internal communication topic where young people, the day-to-day media planners, everyone in our teams, they actually care about what can they do to actually affect change. So I think there's a lot of that conversation that we're really excited about as a publisher, having those conversations with media planners, buyers, agency teams to really have that conversation, not just at the CMO level, not just at the, the top level, but also at the day-to-day level. And that's really what we're excited to do in the next period.
Yeah, I think now for everyone, this is the time to get involved, because if you want to have a say, you want to have a voice, you can join the IAB, you can join Prebid, you can join any group you want. Right now, everyone is looking for people to come in and help build a solution. So there is nothing here that is fully baked out, that you're coming in at the last mile and nothing's going to happen or nothing, your input won't be accepted. Right now is the time to have input and to have an opinion on this, because it will be something we will be living with for probably the next 10 to 15 years, whatever's developed now. So for us, it's just that simple. Get involved, get engaged. And, that could mean multiple things, not just from a pre-bid perspective. I'm selfishly just focused on the code and the product, right, and the standards, right? That's a small piece, right, to what Chao was talking about, getting involved in a bigger perspective, right, from a scope 1 and a scope 2 perspective, like your companies have to get behind that, because the media part of it is going to be 10-15% probably your carbon emissions. Everything else, like, you're not going to check the box on media and then, everything else, you're burning coal in a building, right, and that's everything's going to work out for you. Everything's got to be on your side from a company perspective. Everything's got to be aligned to work in concert to get you to a point of zero carbon emissions, right? And to get you to a point where you're being fully sustainable, right? It's not just looking at this as a silo, let's build a product and a standard. It's also how everything else will impact that from your company matters.
And I spoke about, the average publisher increasing integrations and adding partners. But that's not always the case, and we observe publishers trimming down partners all the time. And I think that's ultimately what we want to see in terms of reducing carbon emissions. And so, Chao and Scott, can you guys describe your experiences in trimming things down and being able to remove partners without fear of losing out on revenue?
Yeah, so I'm a huge proponent of testing and learning and seeing what can be done differently. In this case, more efficient, more effectively. So we go through continuous processes of reviewing partners, reviewing integrations in order to best understand who is actually contributing value, and not just kind of a scenario where if we pull them out or add them, the revenue just moves from one place to another. So we definitely put a lens, a significant magnifying lens on that, on at minimum a quarterly basis, in order to ensure that we're taking a less is more approach with the way in which we broadcast our inventory. And we've definitely found many scenarios of, hey, we don't really need these handful of partners because they're not contributing to our overall yield game. So we just kind of continuously iterate on that mentality.
Yeah. I think aside from just reviewing different partners, the other thing we kind of started to do this year, when we did the initial assessment with Scope 3, and then we just did another take a look yesterday around just where we are from Q1 standpoint. We reduced our overall kind of general carbon by about 20%, and we're not seeing any kind of yield impact. And a huge part of that is, we haven't really gone through like, okay, this vendor we're going to turn off, this vendor we're going to turn on, but rather we went into each of our partners and said, okay, how many calls do we need to make? How many resellers are going through each pipe? And do we need all of those things? And do we need to have all of the DSPs being called to get that bid? I think once you look into that mechanism of the entire ecosystem, you can turn off a lot of that long tail in the individual SSPs and in the individual systems, and then that actually reduce a lot of that wasteful calls that doesn't really yield anything. The other thing ultimately we want to start doing more of is looking at our inventory, get to the granularity to say, hey, do we need to call every single partner in every single ad unit, in every single region? So really measuring that level of granularity to see how we can actually have the most effective and efficient yield gain.
We also, just one other item, we're beginning to look at the ad units on the pages in different devices, right? Just how many ads can you put on an iOS device and expect to extract a good amount of revenue? So we're definitely beginning to be mindful of that. And do we really need all of these requests to actually happen? It helps definitely putting a lens on user experience and contributing to that and general user retention as well.
Awesome. And I do want to mention, we monitor supply chain efficiency, and Mediavine is one of the most efficient web publishers that we observe. Kenrika, I would like to give you an opportunity to just speak to what some of the steps Mediavine has taken to become one of the most efficient publishers on the web.
Absolutely. We're really proud of that. So I think one of the things that has been very advantageous for us is the fact that we are direct. We have a clean, direct path to inventory. If you want to get through to a site, we have control over all that. We control all the ads on the page. We have control over our publishers' ads.txt files. We have very little intermediaries, if you will. And as Scott mentioned, we are really big on testing and our our partner performance. We do not shy away from severing ties or, cutting our weakest performing partners. And we also leverage our server to server, which means that we run the auction on the server side, which means that we incur the cost, which forces us to be more efficient and to be very careful. So I think the testing, the direct path, and the server to server really has helped us to be as efficient as possible.
Awesome. I think we're a little pinched for time, but I want to give each of you an opportunity to give, what's one thing you'd recommend any publisher do to have an immediate impact on their carbon footprint?
I'll go first. I gotta just be careful what I say, but I would say every publisher should look at who they're working from a reseller perspective and 100% understand from a reseller who truly is driving incremental revenue for you, right? Who's complementary to what you're getting from the bigger SSPs. And don't be afraid to shut one or two down and see what happens. And I guarantee you every publisher in this room is probably working with too many resellers, right? And I guarantee you even from a major SSP perspective, you're probably working with too many SSPs, right? So if you start there, you're going to get more efficient. I think you're going to see less fraud. I think you're going to see 100% higher viewability rates. And I think you're also going to see an uptick in CPMs because you're starting to control the narrative of your inventory to the open market, as well as whatever you're doing in PMPs, which is also part of this, and PG and everything else. But I think if you do that, before even standards are set, you'll be ahead of the game, right? You'll already start seeing an impact from an efficiency perspective, right? And I think that's what you should all be striving for.
I would echo that a little bit and say evaluate your partner performance and don't be afraid to eliminate your weakest performing partner.
For us, it's learning and collaboration. So just work with your partners, work with your buyers, and really having those conversations so that we can all work together.
I'm going to take a little different path. And as a publisher, I think we should all kind of take a look at our entire technology infrastructure, right? How the pages are built, how the sites are built, not only just the ads, because all of any lack of efficiency that exists there is going to tax the browser, it's going to tax the user's device, and so on and so forth along that entire chain. So I think that's it's an overwhelming effort, but a strong place to start, especially for media companies who want to kind of contribute back to the environment and contribute back to this conversation.
Awesome. Thank you. Let's make it happen.